Hi, everyone. I just wanted to get on here and do a quick video about a topic that I think is often overlooked among people who are learning coding and software development and computer science. And it's something that I have really been uh, focusing a lot of my work on in the past couple of weeks. And so I just wanted to go over this with you really quickly. And I have, I'm just going to be sharing some notes that I took to help keep me on track to share all this with you. And hopefully, since there's a lot here, being able to look at it as I'm talking it through will also hopefully help you guys too. So, yeah, let me just go ahead and get started. So, basically, there's a common misconception, I think, for a lot of people who are new to coding and software development, that writing code is what you'll be doing for most of the time. And while, yes, in a lot of cases, you will be doing a lot of times you will be writing code. Writing code is actually just one part of software development. And like I said, if you've been taking computer science classes, you might have seen that or felt that you were really focused on just writing code, right? So, for example, if you take, I have a lot of students who take AP Computer Science, and back even when I took AP Computer Science back a long, long time ago, um, the focus was really writing Java code. And when I took AP Computer Science, it was like C++ code. But the main focus again was just writing the code, right? And then when I teach classes, usually what I try to do is I try to find coding platforms and environments that have the environment already set up for the students. So, they don't have to install anything, they don't have to download anything. Or if they do, it's just really simple. You can get in and start coding, right? And, that's good for learning how to code, but if you've done your own code projects or, you've worked as a software developer for your job, you've probably already realized that actually writing code is just one part of your work, right? And there are some days where your work will be focused not so much on writing code, but on other things. And for example, one thing that I really want to focus on today is tasks that you'll focus on that are more geared towards working with tools and services rather than coding. And this is a really big, important part of software development. And so when I'm talking about tasks or tools and services, I'm talking about things like, for example, choosing and installing software development environments and platforms. So, I mentioned before that with my classes, I usually try to choose something, like maybe like Replit or some other online software development environment where you don't have to install your own environments or set up your own platforms. But, you might find that you have to choose between installing tools like Visual Studio or Android Studio or Eclipse, depending on whatever your project is. And, I'm sure you can think of a lot of other software development environments that we could list here. And, the helpful part is that sometimes if you're working on a job or a project for someone else, those tools will already be determined for you. But in a lot of cases, you still have to go through and and install the tools and do the setup yourself, right? And that can be really complicated and take a lot of time, especially the fact that you have to consider the steps for your specific operating system, right? So sometimes if you're using Windows, for instance, you might have to go through more steps than you would have to if you were using like Linux or, Apple or something like that. So, you might have to spend a lot of time on tasks like that. Another thing is sometimes you also have to set up virtual environments if necessary. And so a virtual environment is basically like you have your computer that has like a certain operating system installed on it, like Windows or Apple or whatever the case might be, or like a Mac or whatever the case might be. But like for in my case, for example, there have been a lot of projects that I've worked on where um, the projects required you to use tools for Linux, right? So instead of going out and buying a whole new computer with Linux installed or, changing my operating system, I had to download something called Windows Subsystems for Linux or WSL or WSL. So I had to spend a lot of time going through that, installing it and setting it up, right? So, that's one example of working with tools that you might have to do as part of your software development process. In addition to like the development environment itself, you might also need to spend a lot of time downloading, installing, and managing additional software packages. All right. So, a place where this comes up personally for me and a lot of the work that I've done is in web development. So, if you know anything about web development, you know that the basics of web development are HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, right? And I'm not going to go into too much detail about what those are, but those are like the basic like plain languages or tools um, that you use to develop websites and web apps and things like that, right? But in web development these days, it's usually a lot quicker and easier to download additional frameworks and tools that help you build websites faster or web apps faster, right? So you might end up having to install and work with additional JavaScript frameworks and libraries like Vue or React or Angular and things like that, right? So don't worry if you haven't seen or heard of these names before. It's just giving you an idea of some of the things that are out there, and just the take home message is that in a lot of cases it's not just the plain HTML and JavaScript, right? Um, in addition, you might also need to set up a Node.js environment to do your web development too, right? And that can Node.js is another tool that helps you to manage and install and work with some of the other software packages that are out there, right? Um, you might also have to work with visual styling tools like Sass and Bootstrap and Tailwind, all right? So and that's just one example. That's just in web development, right? That doesn't even include things like desktop development or Android development or things like that. So um, when you're learning some of these languages in your coding classes, um, in a lot of cases in a real world job situation or on your own projects, you're not just using those languages straight out the box with nothing else. You might have to add some additional software languages or tools or packages as well. All right. Um, another task that you might face when you're working with tools and services or might include building, packaging, and preparing your own code for release, right? So that's when, you've built your code, uh, but now you have to actually prepare it so that it can go out to the final end user environment for your users to be able to install on and use, right? And sometimes that can take some work, right? So, for instance, if you're doing anything with Java or Android, they have like these build management tools with names like Gradle and Maven and Ant, right? So those really help to make sure that all the software packages and tools that you used in your project are up to date and organized and in the right place and all packaged up together so that then you can ship out your software project to wherever it's supposed to go, right? So, like with Android and Java, for example, with Android, a lot of times Java is the programming language, but Android is the platform. So, when you've written your Java code, you have to like build it and package it up so that you can send it out, right, to wherever its final destination is. So you might have to have build management tools like that. Another tool that you might use for that building or packaging is like a code formatter. So basically, with code formatters, that's more of like the visual aspect to make your code visually readable, and that might include things like the right amount of white space, the right amount of tabs, or, just if you're a programmer looking at someone else's code, there has to be like a standard style guide, right? Or a set of style conventions. And that's where code formatters come into play. So for some of the work I've done with Python, for instance, um, I've had to use code formatters like Black and Rough, right? And you might be in a situation where some of the projects that you work on, you're not even allowed to check in or submit the code that you've written to like the larger company code base until you've used these formatters. All right. So then you'll have to make sure that you um, that build in time and space into your workflow to understand how to work with the code formatters. All right, so that's another tool, common tool that you might see. Another example, a recent example that I've worked with is um, the past couple of weeks. I've been working with getting a game that I created in a game development tool called GDevelop. Um, I've made that game so that it's playable in several formats. You can download it on Windows, you can download it, or you can play it in a web browser without downloading anything, or you can play it on an Android phone, right? And it's in the Google App Store. So one of the things that I've been working on over the past couple of weeks is that in GDevelop, to prepare your game for Android, one of the options is to manually build it, right? So to build it up and package it up manually. So there's an automatic version where you can send it to like the GDevelop server and they'll automatically build it for you. But there's a limited number of times that you can do that. There's a limit. So if you do it manually, it's unlimited builds, but that includes a little bit of extra work. So the two main tools that I've had to use for that are Cordova, which is a framework or tool that lets you take code or apps that you've built in HTML, web applications, and package them up and put them in other environments like Android or iOS, right? So basically, it's a way it saves you some time because you don't have to write the same code like three different times for three different environments, right? So that's what Cordova is. So I had to spend some time installing that and making sure I knew how that worked and whatnot, and going through it and changing my project settings and things like that. All right. And then I also had to use Android Studio, which one of the things I mentioned earlier for your software development environment, right? And I used Android Studio to build and package the release for the um, Google Play Store, but also to test the game on virtual devices, right? Because one of the tricky things about app development is everybody's got like a different type of phone, right? Especially if you're doing Android, there's all sorts of different phones, manufacturers, screen sizes, all sorts of things, right? Nobody can have like all the phones, right? And also like different versions of Android, right? So the version of Android that came out, a couple of years ago is probably going to be different than like the newest update that you get on your phone this year, right? So you have to have a way to test all of those different devices, and in order to do that, you have to also take the extra time to download and install the different virtual Android devices so that you can simulate them on your computer, You don't have to buy a physical phone, you simulate it or emulate it on your computer, as well as getting those devices, those emulator devices. You also have to download and install the proper versions of the Java Developer Kit and the tools that come with that, right? So now you've got another layer of tools that you have to work with and install that are getting outside of like the pure coding part of it. So, I've spent a lot of time over the past couple of weeks downloading and installing these tools, optimizing them so they work well on my computer without taking forever to load, things like that, reading documentation and also writing down my steps. And I'll talk more about that later. All right. Okay, yeah. So building, packaging, and preparing your own code for release. That's another um, task that you'll have to work with that is non-coding, that's focused on tools and services. And you also will need to set up and navigate accounts for different software services. All right. So some of these I've kind of touched on before, but for some examples, when you're doing code that you're working in a team where a lot of different people are working with the code base, or even if you're doing your own solo project and you want a way to keep track of the different versions of the code that you have, like you make changes and you might need to go back and revisit old changes because you broke something, right? So that's where we get source control, right? And services like GitHub, right? Um, so you might have heard of GitHub, but it's a very important part of a lot of software development projects, professionally and personally, and you have to set up an account for that, and you have to learn how to use GitHub and know what the commands are and whatnot, and that's like a whole other topic that you might want to look at. um, you also, in a lot of cases, particularly in a professional environment, you don't just sit down and write code, right? A lot of times, the project manager will divide the coding up into different tasks and tickets, right? So that's how people know what everybody's working on, how you break things down into different pieces that other people can work on, right? And so that you know what everybody's progress is on a particular task. And that's where you get tools like Jira and GitLab, Azure, and all sorts of things like that, right? And in a lot of cases, you have to set up accounts for that and understand how that works. If you're doing any sort of game where you have monetization, anything other than the player pays for the game up front and downloads it, and now they've got the final version. If you have anything, for instance, like you have ads in your game, right? Advertisements or in-app purchases or marketplaces, um, you have to set up accounts and tools for that too, right? And then, of course, like I mentioned, app stores. Like if you want to get people to play your game and download it from Google Play, or for like the Apple Store, or for Steam or any other place like that, right? You have to set up accounts for that. Not only do you have to set up the accounts, you have to make sure that your accounts and your apps or games releases are compliant with the marketplace requirements, right? So, for instance, if you're releasing an Android app on Google Play in the Google Play Store, you have to make sure that your app is periodically updated to target certain Android versions, right? So, you have to keep an eye on that. Some of these marketplaces also require you to verify the identity associated with your developer accounts. So, that's if anybody's like a Google Play developer, I know that was a big thing over the past couple of years. If you don't stay compliant, you might have your games removed or you might have your developer account shut down. So that's another big non-coding part of software development. All right. So, having said all of that, I have some tips for you that I suggest you think about to help you prepare for all of these tasks in your possible future career as a software developer, a software engineer. All right. So the first thing is to get very familiar with the command line, because a lot of the tools that you use will require it, right? And that's things like, if you're using Windows, that's like the command prompt, like when you go to cmd.exe, so it looks like this, right? And you type in commands, right? And, it's just, in most cases, it's like a black screen with like a blinking cursor that allows you to type things in, and then you get some sort of output, right? You do a lot of work with tools on the command line, right? And that could be depending on what you're using. Like if you're using Windows, it might be PowerShell or cmd.exe. If you're using Linux or Apple, it might be like the terminal. So work with some of those things and learn some basic tools and commands for your particular environment. All right, because that can be intimidating for a lot of people. I also suggest that you practice reading documentation. All right, get those reading skills up. Videos are nice, but not everything is going to be in video form. And in fact, a lot of things are not going to be in video form. And if you think about it, written documentation is usually easier or faster to update than having to constantly release and edit and update videos whenever something new happens, right? Um, so get good at reading documentation. Develop basic computer literacy skills, right? So that's knowing how to do basic non-coding things on your computer. Things like knowing how to zip and unzip packages and files, right? Um, if I know in Windows, one of the big things is setting environmental variables, and you might have to do that on other operating systems as well, right? Because when you're trying to, particularly like with Java, that's one of the things I work with a lot. So, when I'm trying to build something in Java, I have to make sure the computer knows where to look for like the Java development tools, right? So you might need to know environmental variables, how to set those on your computer. And also, just really simple things like knowing, like when you download something, knowing where it goes on your computer, like what folder and or whatnot, because you're going to have to download a lot of different tools to install, right? And, if you don't know where they're going, where to find them on your computer when you download them, you're going to be stuck, right? Um, I also suggest documenting your steps. So get good at writing down your steps and the lessons learned, right? So if you have a problem that you spend a lot of time working on and you finally solve it, write that down so that you can replicate the tasks again if you need to do them again, right? Nothing worse than like figuring out how to do a task on your computer and you've got your computer up for like a day or okay, maybe longer, and then you have to shut down and then you come back the next day and you're like, oh gosh, I don't remember how to do what I did and I don't have like my command prompts up and all that stuff, right? So write stuff down. Because really, if you have to try and remember how to retrace your steps every time you have to do a task, it's frustrating and it wastes time. All right. And like if you're if you're in a job situation, it's always nice to have a written record of how to do the workflow tasks, right? Because otherwise you'll have to wait for someone else to make time to help you, or you'll have to be the one who has to sit and help people um, and walk through steps, right? So like if you're like new to a job or whatever, one of the things that you might have to do is to pair up with someone and they can walk you through how to get everything installed on your computer, right? Um, but what if that person is not available? Like, are you supposed to sit and wait for them? Do you always want to have to be dependent on somebody else being available to meet with you? Do you want to simple tasks that you could do if they were just written down so that others can read and follow the steps. And then maybe you consult with someone where if something's not clear or maybe you have a problem that the written steps don't address, right? So get good at documenting your steps, and that will also help you be more valuable at your job too, because being able to write that stuff down makes you a very valuable asset to any job site. Um, I'd also say maybe learn some frameworks or skills that require you to work with some of these different skills, just so you get practice and feel more comfortable with it. So, for instance, I mentioned like some of the web development stuff. So maybe just learn some of the things like React or Vue, you know, just so you get a feel for how to do some of the non-coding tasks. So it's not such a surprise when you get in the workplace or on a personal project and have to do some of these things, right? Um, this also kind of goes back to reading documentation. Develop your research skills because, like I said, you'll have a lot of things that you'll need to look up, and you'll have a lot of questions that you'll need to be able to find answers to. So being able to research is a big key. All right. And lastly, just really be patient. Learn patience. Sometimes this can be really frustrating, especially if you're spending a lot of time doing non-coding work and if you have a lot of different tools to work with, or you have like some pesky problem that everyone on Reddit or Stack Overflow or wherever you go for help asks about it, but no one seems to have a solution that has worked for you, or maybe nobody has found a solution at all. That can be really frustrating. So work on your patience level. And if you need to sometimes calm down and take a break, and come back to it with fresh eyes. But if you do that, make sure you're bookmarking or leaving in a good space where, in the process, where when you come back to it and you're ready to start again, you can pick right back up where you left off, rather than having to try to scramble and figure out, okay, well, what was I doing? Where was I? And that could also go back to documenting your work. All right. So write things down, take screenshots, do whatever you need to do to make it easy to come back to. Okay. So I will talk more about different non-coding areas in software development, but this was just something that was a really big, important part of software development that I've been doing over the past couple of weeks. And I haven't really updated you guys in a while, so I wanted to just take some time out and talk to you about this if you are new to software development or aspire to become a software developer. Okay. So thanks, and I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to, leave a comment, or reach out and let me know. All right. Thanks and happy coding, everyone.